All right, so what I kind of did is we took a look. I kind of opened it up to my Facebook group, and one of the things that they kind of wanted to know is how did you get started in art? Because everybody was kind of there was at least four questions of how did you get started? Because I mean, you've got successful gallery shows.
Sure.
How did that kind of happen? And I'm not talking about how you stumbled into the gallery, but kind of what made you think that you maybe had a creative process to start with?
So, in essence, I guess I could use an example of sorts. So it all started on something like this, where I realized that I'm going to begin filling this in. And then I realized after that, wow, if I could do that, then I could do by 2 feet. And then after that, I could do 5 by 5 feet. And if I could do that, then I could just keep expanding. And I think that was the biggest pull. It was just to challenge myself.
Okay, so the geometric designs that you kind of make, right? So you started off doing geometric designs on a small scale.
Absolutely.
And then the scale just kind of expanded.
Yes.
What is it about geometric designs that really drew you to that process? What kind of joy do you get out of that? What kind of feeling do you get out of that?
I think there's something comforting about seeing cohesiveness and synchronicity and to be in some way responsible. Because a lot of times I'm kind of feel like I'm vacant inside, where it's maybe you want to call it the divine force or the muse or whatever you will kind of leads the hand, because many times I've just kind of zoned out in a way where I just kind of draw and then I wake up and 5 minutes later there's a big square or a circle or a big blotch of patterns that have completed itself. So, and then when I look down again, I'd be like, wow, it all kind of came together. And I think in life, a lot of times we look for those opportunities that when we see balance and we know it's balanced, it kind of brings a certain settling within inside ourselves. And not settling in terms of, to settle, banality, mediocrity, things of that nature. It's more settling in terms of everything is at calm, everything's tranquil. And that's a wonderful feeling to achieve.
Okay, so in a way, almost, you're using the geometric pattern to achieve some sort of tranquility and some sort of balance. If you were to describe your art using like three adjectives, right, or three themes, what would the three themes be that you would say your art is generally about?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Intricacy, which is probably a noun, but regardless, I like the intricacies because I love mechanical movements, especially in watches and things like that. So I'm very drawn to the inner workings of components, whether they're human beings, which sounds kind of sociopathic in nature, I know, regardless. But I do appreciate that kind of neural networks about what makes things tick in all forms. Secondly, another action word in a way is discipline. I enjoy the fact that I have to spend a certain amount of time doing something and it engrosses me. Where it's like I feel when you're doing art in that regard, you're kind of omitting yourself through all of the flux that's in the daily life. And by putting yourself in there and giving yourself to it, you're giving yourself the opportunity to do something that is productive, it can be arduous, and you can go about it with a fervent energy. And I like that, the application of it, just to give myself to something that isn't going to in some way contribute to someone else suffering is another way. Third, as you said, I would like to say it would be third. Beauty. I like to achieve that. I like to think on some level that I'm bringing forth something that's beautiful, that can enhance someone's space, that can make somebody visit it again and again and again. So intentionally, I like trying to put kind of, sometimes people call them Easter eggs. I like interjecting Easter eggs into the work, so then all of a sudden people will go back to the work again. And I think that's something really to think about as an artist is, are you producing something that they'll revisit your own work, even if it's on their wall? Because if you think about it, if you're creating a bouquet of flowers, after a while it might blend into the background. Sadly to say, but eventually it's going to lose its dynamicism. However, if there's something, and maybe it's a personal decision, as I say, to go through the abstract route, but when I receive compliment by a client or a viewer that says, I rediscovered something about your work. I found something new today. That is probably the best compliment I could ever receive. That means they looked at it a few months later. It didn't just become a piece of furniture in their house. And I think that's something we need as artists to be weary of, that we don't want our work to become furniture.
Good. So kind of furniture is something that you get joy out of once. Let's say the couch, you've seen the couch, you've seen the upholstery on the couch, it is what it is. You're talking about that piece of art, the investment that client makes, bringing them joy not just on February 22nd, but also in April and May, 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
Sure.
So let's talk about that. You've been doing that now for a while, right? This isn't today you decided to paint and tomorrow you discovered success.
Sure.
Talk a little bit about your journey. When did you kind of start? And just if you gave us the 5-minute overview of your career from where you started to now, what would that look like in terms of your progression?
Absolutely. So I enjoy telling this story because I think it's very important for artists to understand that perhaps if you haven't had your first gallery show, or you're ultimately wishing to kind of pursue this and kind of throw your hat in the ring, I like to say that, throw your hat in the ring. It's a long progression, and you're going to have to be patient, and ultimately you're going to have to experience waiting. And it's just going to make you stronger. And at the same time, rejection is fascinating, and perhaps I sometimes like to parallel it to going out and asking someone out on a date, if you think about it in that regard, or fearing that someone's going to not receive you well if it's the other way around. This is your first date, and you're in a position where someone's courting you, and you have to think from that perspective. So I was very fortunate that the first time I showed was actually at a gallery, and then later in life I kind of backpedaled in a weird way, and then actually I don't want to call it backpedaling. I think that'd be kind of pretentious and arrogant to say. It's more that a lot of individuals start at coffee shops or restaurants, they put their works in there first, and then it can lead to gallery showings. I was very fortunate, and I'm going to tell you a unique story of how that happened, where I put my hat in the ring and I said, I'm going to quit my job. I was working in urban renewal in San Francisco at the time, and I was living in Oakland, and I had saved some money through kind of hoarding my vacation hours. So I'd have enough money to pretty much last me for 3 months and see what happens. So I was like, all right, well, let's see what happens, which is incredibly foolish. I don't really recommend people doing that. It was a stroke of luck and chance and things of that nature that happened there. So at the time I was creating what would be my first triptych, and it is a large-scale piece. Each panel is 3 by 4 feet long, and the patterns that I do, it covered the complete 12 feet of space. So in its own right, it looked like kind of a pocket dimension. So ultimately, one of my neighbors, I asked him because I wanted kind of an opinion. This is when I was 27 years old. I said to him, hey, you want to see some art? Just because I wanted to garner people's opinions. And he's like, yeah, man, whatever, someday. So lo and behold, a month and a half later, I asked him again, you want to see some art? Well, as fate would have it, he had dropped acid the night before, and he was telling me outside, having a cigarette, about his epiphany, about how I need to listen to people, I need to be more open and receptive to people. I watched this baseball game, and I understood the mechanics of baseball, so let me see your art. So he comes in my apartment, and as a person who had just taken LSD the night before and had the effects still wearing off, when he saw 12 feet of intense, intricate patterns, his mind was blown, and he says, my brother is an artist at this gallery. I'm going to make a phone call for you. So that is a very unique circumstance, but the reason I bring this up, and this is very important that I've found, is the fact that the best opportunities that have come to life as an artist is when someone asked me, not the other way around. And that can be achieved even at a coffee shop. For example, my work was in a coffee shop later on. Someone approached me through the website, a local, and said, you know that piece in there? If it's still available, I'd like to purchase it, which is wonderful. Then there are other times where I was at a restaurant in San Jose, California. The gallerist came about, saw the work, and said, I'd like to put you in a show. And that's an amazing opportunity just because she happened to be eating there. I didn't approach her, and it just kind of came into light. Now, there's a caveat to that as well. One of the things that really solidified that connection was she gave me an opportunity, and this is where truth, earnestness, and character really shines, is I was bringing my work, de-installing it from the gallery. This guy, who I thought was an average dude because, you know, he worked at a car lot, come to find out he owned the car lot. And he said, oh, you're taking this down? You're done with your show? My wife really likes it. And I was loading it in the car. And he says, I'd like to purchase it. How much? How much? And I said, well, I'll give you a deal because it's afterwards. And this is the price, which happened at that time to be $500 because I didn't have to, quote, pay the gallery commission involved in that. So ultimately, I gave him the piece. And then I thought to myself, wait a second. The gallery gave me this opportunity. I'm going to give them half, even though I don't need to. And I went back to her and I said, Sherry, this is what I was given for this piece, and I'd like to give you half. Because of that, years and years of relationship came. So when you think about it, don't always think in the short term. You need to think in the long haul, because it is a very kind of intimate, close-knit community, and word will travel about your behavior.
So while your path forward might have been a little bit, I'm going to say, unconventional in some ways, it was about patience, and it was about speaking to the market, putting yourself into those positions, right? Putting yourself in the gallery, putting yourself in the coffee shop, first doing the art on your wall. So that you had a body of work to show in a way, right? When you just magically picked up the pen the first time, nobody was commissioning your stuff.
Absolutely.
You did it for you. Then there was patience, and that things that you maybe didn't think about, like your neighbor being connected with his brother who was showing at a gallery.
Sure.
You weren't actively knocking on your neighbor's door going, hey, buy my shit and tell your famous brother that we should probably do this.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. And you mentioned that the car owner, that his wife really liked your piece. If we take a look at the intricacy, the discipline, and the beauty, which are the three things that you really talked about, what do you think that your clients, because you have them show you their installations in their home, right? Even on your website, you've got about 50 installations that shows your art just isn't purchased. There's actually validation. What is it about your art that you think makes them feel a certain way about themselves? So they love your art, like the piece behind you, right? They really like it. What is that thing that you think it makes them feel that says, I want this in my home? What is that connection that you make?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because you just gave me an idea on something I'd like to share with everybody. Two things. I think they feel time, that it took somebody time to do this, that it wasn't just something that was done in 3 minutes and then they said, oh, here you go. Here you go. Here's my soul. They could tell that a lot of time was spent on here. And second is this. My work found a niche. Or is it a niche? We'll say whatever. You know?
Whatever it is.
Whatever it is.
A niche. Man. Bring it
niche and a niche. So regardless, what happened is because of the intricacies, it really got to be popular with engineers, computer programmers, people in tech industry, people in medical device industry, and also there's a strange dynamic in that because I have to say 80% of my clients are males. The 20% of females that appreciate my work, they're very business-minded people. And it's fascinating. They're more connected to the entrepreneurial spirit. There's a fashion designer who collects my work. She owns a variety of companies. And one of the things that she likes about it is there's that order and structure. And for someone who built up companies, that is a tremendous thing to see reflected back on something that they have on their wall. They see themselves through the patterns. especially because if you think of what a pattern is, it's a series of events, sometimes replicated, sometimes healthy, sometimes unhealthy. But regardless, it's indicative of something. Well, what is it indicative of? It's indicative of some kind of choice, some kind of decision, a pathway of decisions, all of those things conglomerating into a singular whole. So I think those are the things that really draw them to the work. So as far as advice to artists, when you sense something, as far as you feel that like, it seems like there's some kind of subset of a demographic that appreciates the work, really listen to that and understand maybe these are the individuals that I need to cater to the most as far as where I'd like to kind of pitch things to, because eventually you do have to put your boots on the ground. That's important. But as far as that's concerned, you can think about what cities to go towards. So a lot of my work shows in San Jose. And what's in San Jose? That's the heart of the Silicon Valley. You got Mountain View, you got Palo Alto, San Mateo, Burlingame. All these places are related to individuals who are in that particular field. So, and that's something that you will discover as you go along.
So what's interesting about that, just kind of wrapping it back, because a lot of people that will be listening to this interview are definitely aspiring artists, right? That haven't had the success you've had, or maybe are jumping into other fields. Even though you would consider yourself at heart to be an artist, and you talk about the discipline, you talk about the intricacy, you haven't ignored the business side of what you do either. The galleries that you show at, as you said, cater to your demographic. You know your numbers, right? You just talked about an 80-20 split. And you also understand that they're largely entrepreneurial or they're tech-minded. So while we're saying a lot of times people think, well, you either have to be pure artist or pure business person, you cannot separate the two. And I think you've demonstrated that fairly well here.
Sure.
With that, also, do you think that maybe the reason that they are more entrepreneurial minded is that if they are computer programming savvy, or they might be entrepreneurial, or they may be a fashion designer, there's a certain amount of freedom and flow, which I think is captured in your work, underlying a certain amount of structure, intricacy, and bare bones. I mean, in all of your work, it seems to me to really have a common theme that runs throughout in your geometric designs, with a lot of freedom and flow in your individual pieces. Would that be at least a fair assumption?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things you just kind of jogged my memory about something that I can really kind of convey is think very carefully if you want to go the route of making reproductions. Think about that as far as who you want to be. And I'm glad you mentioned the art and the pure artist versus the business person. That's something to really take into heart. I personally chose not to make reproductions of my work or prints or etchings so that I can build a personal relationship with the client. And I think that's something you're going to ask yourself about your personality type. Do you want to have coffee with somebody? Do you want to go out to lunch with someone? Do you want to go to their house and spend time with them and say, bring something for, we'll use an even number, $1,000. Do you want to give them a painting for $1,000, or do you want to sell 10 people something for $50 that's mass produced and never see them again? And then at the same time, really, you'll never have the opportunity to sit down with them, and actually they become your buddy, and it doesn't really have to be about art after that, which is nice, you know, because I think one thing to really consider is once the art is done and you put it out into the world, it's really a tangible item. And the reason why I'm using the word item is you can hold it, you can touch it, it's tactile, and yes, understandably so, and I have to remember that as well. Your soul is connected to it in a way, your heart is, your mind is, all that energy you spent to it. But it takes a life force on its own. The person who acquires it could either enjoy it, maybe put it in the attic, because you never know what's going to happen. They could ultimately grow tired of it, and then you'd never know that. So I think the rapport and the building is when you know that you've done well and you know that you've pretty much built that relationship with a client, when you go and visit their house a couple years ago and business is nowhere remotely near it, you see your work on their wall. And that, I think, is making it too, that they didn't take it down or swap it for something else. So that's big. And meanwhile, they look at the piece, they spend time with the piece, and they call you up or send you an email saying, you know, I have a room I just renovated. I repainted the kitchen. Let's talk about something we can put in the dining room.
So it's about building connection, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's something, when we take a look at some of the artists that are going to be listening to this are in the digital realm, and some are absolutely in the more traditional mediums. And when we look at it, the digital realm seems relatively disconnected from the process that you just described. Mm-hmm. However, if we look at how we get clients, because from a digital art side, we're in the age of Facebook ads, pay-per-click, and all of these rather robotic metrics. Mm-hmm. When we look at this, it's about how you get your clients that really matters. So what you're saying is, I can be in the reproduction realm and sell 100 pieces at $10 a piece to make my 1,000. But that's going to be a rather impersonal way to do it. You're not going to know who gets those 100 replicates. And the amount of value that they get isn't going to be what they get out of the $1,000 piece where you're going to sell one. Now, you'll never create that piece again. But it's not about the piece, it's about the connection.
Absolutely.
And what you say that one of the things your clients get in the utility of what you do is a constant connection to you. And in terms of every time they look at the painting, it's something for them to really look deeper into. And it's something that reminds them of the relationship that they have with you and the uniqueness of what you do. Is that a true statement?
Yes, I would say so. And the thing is this, when you're giving them an original piece of work, they know that you're not putting on a shine, so to speak. It's kind of like it's theirs and it belongs to them. They don't ever have to think about, oh, well, he's just selling me something because there's 50 of them out there. And in my opinion, and like I said, it's really based on your priorities. But for me, I realized that I felt like it would be a tremendous disrespect. I wanted them to enjoy the piece for themselves. So that's something to really think about. And going back to the first gallery show I had, I was taught a tremendous lesson where the gallerist, Lonnie, said to me, I don't do reproductions. Don't do reproductions. And I'm glad that was the first person in the art market that I ever met.
And
she told me that.
I think it's interesting that artists find other like-minded artists. So she wasn't in the reproductive realm, and she said, I don't want you to be in the reproduction realm.
Sure.
So it really kind of set the stage, and I think that's an important point for many artists. The goal is not to do business with everybody. The goal is to do business with people who believe what you believe and want what you really have.
Yeah, and another point to think about this is this. Would you like to build connections with 3 people in a year? Or would you rather have no connections with 50 people in a year? And those 3 people you can have lunch with, you can enjoy time, and in some ways, and circumstances come, maybe your car breaks down and you need a ride. You can't acquire that from someone you sold a print to.
So really kind of it's more about
Sure.
community.
And especially if you're starting out, you're a starving artist, you never know if that wheel breaks on your car or something like that. You're going to need that ride. Let's be honest. You're going to need something to eat.
Yep.
I think that's a very important thing to think about,
Now, what's interesting, when you go into your creative process, because one of the things you liked about this was the intricacy of it and the fact that, I'm going to use the term, you kind of black out, zone out for a certain time, and you let your mind create. So you're not thinking about that client in a certain way. So really, whatever you create, when you create this, isn't for a specific client. It's your process, who then the client connects with. So when you're creating that piece in your creative process and you're blacking out and you're zoning out and you come back to and you say, listen, this is what's created. Do you think that the geometry that's created kind of helps create that connection? Do you think that there's an underlying universal geometry between people? Just a thought.
That's a good thought there. You know what's funny is because there's so much inside our bodies that we can't really see without the assistance of some kind of weird device. Like I'm not a scientist by any means, so like a microscope or whatever doohickeys they got out there for that kind of thing. I think there's just so much things. I mean, if you think about just like an atom or a molecule or whatever those small particles are called, those are representative of something, and I'm sure they're in patterns doing their thing. So if you think about it there's probably I know it sounds trite of sorts, but there is some universal language of sort. There are certain signals and cues that, like, everyone appreciates a compliment, for the most part, and everyone doesn't like to get their ass handed to them. Yeah, I think there really is. I mean, sometimes, and it's fascinating you mentioned the sacred geometry, and it's going to sound hippie, and it's kind of true, though, in a weird way. You look at a set of trees, and you're like, there's really no ugly trees out there. You know what I mean? They seem to take care of themselves. And I think maybe there's a lesson in that. If you let your hand take care of yourself and kind of let the mind kind of not get involved so much. If you're overthinking and you feel like you're thinking a lot, put the brush down for a bit. Just put it down. Stop. Take a break. Because then you're not letting the inner workings, as I was saying about those trees. I sound like Bob Ross, man, but it's true. There's happy little trees, man. But in reality, it's the same thing with clouds or whatever you want to say. It's just it works, and for some reason, you could tell the universe didn't have to try. It's strange like that, and I think that's something to think about proceeding forward with your ventures and things of that nature. Is if I'm trying too hard, is this something I really want to invest my time in? If it feels like a lot of effort and work and things of that nature. Going back to something that Jeremy mentioned earlier, it made me think of something as far as trajectory of career. There are so many people I know who are much more talented than myself that have so less opportunity than I've received. Yet, there's something in relation to being in the right place at the right time, being patient, and just allowing things to unfold. And it's not about forcing things. So yeah, I want to really reiterate that. How many talented people there are out there who really should be even at my humble position. If I think about baseball, I think I'd be like a AAA baseball player. I'm not going to say that I'm in the majors, and that would be rather up there and kind of far-fetched. But the point is, there's people that should be swinging the bat where I am.
I think the last thing that, I know a lot of people that listen to us kind of want to know, and a lot of questions that I get. You talked about the humbleness, you've talked about the humility, and you've talked about the patience. If you were looking to make it as an artist, what would be your top 2 pieces of advice for somebody other than be patient and work on your craft? Because they're going to hear that all the time. Yeah. What would be your 2 takeaways for a new artist?
You know what's funny, now that you say that? Because rejection is so difficult for most humans to stomach, you find a lot of your competition goes to the wayside after a while on some ways. It's fascinating to see that. Because every jab that comes your way, every time you submit your work, every time you try to get an opportunity, there's someone else who also got that same rejection. And as time progresses, less and less of those individuals are going to be there. It's funny, and granted, yes, there are a younger crowd that's going to kind of come in their footsteps, but it's the resiliency in that regard you'll find that will come into play in that respect. Be resilient, and you got a dream. If you don't have a dream, it's not going to keep you going. You have to think I'm going to acquire something for myself, and whatever that be. My passion, as Jeremy knows very well, is watches. I love watches. Oh, so one thing also, it's very important. Let's think about this, and I'm telling you this on purpose to test your reserves. So, when we're going to say back and forth, I spent about $10,000 that I didn't have to make my first dollar. And by that I mean I bought some materials, so now I'm in the hole $500. Then I needed to frame my work. That got to be another $2,000 because I had to create the show. So now I'm $2,500 in debt. So I sold a piece of art for $1,500. That was my first show. And I didn't sell anything else that whole show, which was very devastating because someone believed in me and gave me a chance, and I felt that I let them down. And I cried. I was humiliated. I felt like I let someone down and they're never going to invite me back. They did, which was very kind. So I'm still in the hole $1,500. Now when other shows come up, I'm buying materials, and then all of a sudden, here we go. Now let's see, obviously I had to reinvest the money, and now let's just say I'm $5,000 in the hole. So I sold a couple more pieces, but I'm still in the hole. So you have to realize, and it took me 4 years before I broke even, and then I got out of the red. So that was 4 years of like, oh my God, what am I doing? But that's where faith in something comes in, you know. I think that's where the dream comes in. You have to perpetuate, you know, and things of that nature. So I don't know if you're looking to be a millionaire. So that's why I say dream big, be hungry, but at the same time, please be realistic so you don't hurt yourself in the process. You know, it's very important to think about. You have to understand things go in spurts. So I'm very optimistic about this year because I have a show coming up in May. I have one in July. I have also one in September, which is kind of a new format for me. So that's coming off a year that, granted, I didn't make as much, but at the same time, I have a potential to make yield. So that's something you have to think about. It's about opportunity, it's about risk, and at the same time, God, you got to remember that it's not going to be the same every year. It's going to rain and pour, you know?
Okay. All right. So if they want to get a hold of you, if they want to see your work, right, we've obviously got links down below to your website, right? I don't know, you're on Instagram, so if you want to give a plug to whatever you want to do here, I know you and I are going to do a couple courses coming up. So take a look at his YouTube, take a look out for his courses because they're coming here. If they're out by the time this interview airs, we'll definitely have the links down below. How can they get a hold of you? What do you want them to know about how to interact with you? Because I think there's going to be a lot of people. Your message right now is exactly my demographic in terms of, I always tell people, if you're starting out in art, don't expect to make $1 million with a used toothpick and a cotton swab. Right?
Absolutely.
Start small. Don't go all in. Quit your job. Put your family at risk. Don't do crazy shit. So your message is absolutely heard, and I think it's very valuable. So how do they get a hold of you? What do you want to plug? What do you got coming up other than your show?
Oh, absolutely. I can be reached at brysonbost.com. That's just my name, and you can give me a Google because I don't think it'd be kind of weird to spell my name out on camera. But it's B-R-Y. No, I'm just kidding. But anyways.
We'll do that through the magic of post.
No, absolutely. So ultimately, drop me an email, and if you're at all interested in kind of learning more, let's start communication. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it, and keep dreaming. It's important to do. I think there's a lot of messages that, regardless of how they come out, they sound kind of cheesy and corny. But in reality, you know, I'm kind of a sucker for those movies. And the funny thing is like I don't really even watch sports on TV. However, I like those movies that they show somebody coming from nothing and making it. You got to keep that mentality going, and don't forget where you came from. You know, remember your boys and your